The desert didn't care if you were 8 years old. It didn't care if you were carrying your little brother on your back because his own legs had given out hours ago. For 4 days, the sun had been a hammer, pounding down on Rosie and 5-year-old Tommy, and the world was nothing but burning sand and shimmering heat. Their lips were cracked open. Their skin was cooked red. Yesterday, the last drop of water was gone, and the empty canteen was just another piece of trash swallowed by the endless wasteland. Hunger was a dull ache, but the thirst was a monster with claws, tearing at them from the inside. Rosie's legs finally buckled. She sank to her knees next to a black, jagged rock, carefully lowering Tommy to the ground. He was so light. Too light. His little chest was barely moving. She had promised Mama. She had promised she would protect him, keep him safe. And she was failing. The memory was a nightmare that played on a loop, the wagon wheel hitting a deep rut, the world turning upside down with a sound like splintering thunder. Mama and Papa, so still, so quiet after the crash. Rosie and Tommy had crawled out from the wreckage, 2 tiny survivors in a world that had just ended. All they had were the clothes on their backs and that one canteen of water. Now, even that was gone. "Tommy, please don't die," she whispered. Her voice was just a dry rasp, like sandpaper on wood. She tried to brush the sandy hair from his forehead, but her own fingers were trembling too much. "I promise, Mama. I'll keep him safe. I promise." Hot tears cut clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. She watched him, his little face pale under the dirt, and she didn't know if he was even breathing anymore. The sun was a furnace, and it was burning away what little strength she had left. She'd tried everything. Followed lizard tracks hoping they'd lead to water. Dug in the sand for moisture. Rationed every single drop. But it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough in this scorching hell. Just when the despair was about to swallow her whole, a shadow fell over them. Rosie squinted, her hand flying up to shield her eyes. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was a man on a horse, a tall, dark shape against the blinding sun. The wide brim of his cowboy hat hid his face, but he seemed solid, real, not a mirage. Her mind screamed at her, a dehydrated ghost of a thought. Was this real? Or was the heat finally making her see things? "Come with me, children," the cowboy said. His voice was low and deep, but it didn't sound mean. Still, a cold spike of fear, sharp and sudden, shot through her. Mama's words echoed in her head. Never trust strangers. Never. But then she looked down at Tommy. His face was slack. His lips had a faint blue tinge. He was dying. Right here. Right in front of her. The cowboy swung down from his horse, slow and easy, like he didn't want to spook a wild animal. "My name is Jake," he said, kneeling a few feet away. "I'm not going to hurt you. But your brother, he needs help, and I can give it to him." Rosie tried to pull Tommy closer, to shield him with her own small body, but her arms wouldn't work. She was just too weak. "Mama said, 'Never trust strangers,'" she croaked, the words tearing at her raw throat. Jake nodded, his shadowed face seeming to understand. "Your mama was a smart woman. She was right to teach you that. But right now, I'm not some stranger trying to trick you. I'm the only person who can save your brother's life." He reached into his saddlebag, moving slowly, and pulled out a canteen. A full one. She could hear the water sloshing inside. He needs this. Right now. And just as he said it, the worst possible thing happened. Tommy's chest, which had been rising and falling so shallowly, just stopped. For a second that felt like 100 years, the world went silent. "Tommy!" Rosie shrieked, her voice cracking as she shook his limp body. "Tommy, please!" Jake moved in a flash, but his hands were gentle. He lifted Tommy's head, uncapped the canteen, and let a few precious drops of water fall onto his parched lips. "Come on, son. Come on back to us." The seconds dragged on, an eternity of silence. Then a cough, a sputter. Tommy's eyelids fluttered open for just a second, a flicker of life, before closing again. That was it. Rosie's defenses, The wall of bravery she had built for 4 days crumbled into dust. She was supposed to be the big sister, the protector, the one who kept her promise to Mama. But she was just a little girl, lost and starving, and she was failing the only job that mattered. "I can't save him," she sobbed, the sound torn from the deepest part of her. "I can't keep my promise. Please, just save Tommy. I don't care what happens to me. Just please, save him." Jake's expression softened. He scooped Tommy up into his strong arms. The boy felt like a bundle of sticks, so fragile it was a miracle he was still alive. "I'm going to save both of you," Jake said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Can you climb up on my horse, sweetheart?" With his help, she managed to pull her weak body onto the saddle. Jake placed Tommy in front of her, letting her cradle him, letting her feel the miraculous rise and fall of his chest against her own. As the horse started to walk, the steady, rhythmic gait was the most comforting thing she had ever felt. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a tiny spark of hope flickered inside her. The burning sand slowly gave way to cracked earth, then patches of stubborn green grass. Trees, like miracles, began to dot the horizon. And then she saw it. Beyond a line of rolling hills, a thin curl of smoke rising from the chimney of a log cabin. It was too perfect. A storybook house in the middle of nowhere. Are you taking us home?" she asked, her voice small, a mix of hope and terror. Jake was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words. "Home is where people love you, little one," he said finally. His voice held a strange warmth, a hint of sadness that she didn't understand. As they came over the last hill, a whole ranch spread out below them. A sturdy cabin with a wide porch, green pastures where animals grazed peacefully. And standing on that porch, a woman in a blue dress, her arms outstretched, as if she had been waiting for them all along. Rosie's heart pounded in her chest. A new wave of fear washed over the hope. Could this be real? Could they trust these people? But as the horse carried them closer to this impossible place, this oasis of safety, Rosie let herself believe. Maybe, just maybe, they were about to find everything they had lost. The ranch was like a dream. After 4 days of nothing but shades of brown and the blinding white of the sun, the impossible green of the fields made Rosie's eyes ache. The air smelled sweet, like flowers and rain and damp earth. A breeze whispered through the leaves of tall trees, a sound so gentle and cool it made her want to cry. Tears blurred her vision. She had forgotten places like this even existed. As Jake's horse plodded closer to the log cabin, a new smell reached her. It was warm and comforting, the smell of baking bread and maybe a rich simmering soup. Her empty stomach clenched with a sharp, painful cramp. "It's like heaven, Tommy," she whispered, pulling her brother's unconscious form tighter against her. He was still so limp, but he was breathing. And right now, that was all that mattered. A woman in a soft blue dress hurried down from the porch. Her face was a canvas of worry and kindness. She had warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through the dirt and grime to the scared children underneath. Her hands, delicate but sure, reached for Tommy the moment Jake dismounted. "Oh my goodness," she breathed, her voice like music. "Jake, you found them. The poor babies." Jake carefully helped Rosie down from the horse. "This is my wife, Julie," he said. "Julie, this is Rosie and her brother, Tommy. I found them out in the flatlands." Julie didn't waste a second. Her fingers were already at Tommy's neck, checking for a pulse. She brushed the matted hair from his forehead, listening to the faint whisper of his breath with a practiced ear. "Bring him inside, quickly. Rosie, honey, can you walk?" Rosie nodded, her legs feeling like they were made of straw. Julie gave her a smile that seemed to radiate pure warmth. "Good girl. You've been so brave, taking care of your brother like this." The inside of the cabin was even more unbelievable. It was clean and bright, with colorful quilts draped over the furniture and shelves packed with books. The smell of good food was everywhere, wrapping around Rosie like a warm, safe blanket. Julie laid Tommy on a soft couch and immediately began cleaning his face with a damp cloth, while Jake brought fresh water and clean towels. "Why are you being so nice to us?" Rosie asked, her voice trembling. Kindness was a currency she hadn't dealt in for a long time. Adults could be nice with their words, but cruel with their actions. She had learned that the hard way. Julie looked up from dabbing a small cut on Tommy's forehead, and Rosie saw that her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "Because every child deserves to be safe, sweetheart," she said softly. "Every child deserves to be loved." Julie's touch was gentle, her movements efficient. "Now, when was the last time you two had something to eat?" Rosie had to think hard. The days had blurred together. "Maybe yesterday? We found some berries, but they made Tommy sick." Julie nodded, her expression grim. In what felt like minutes, a bowl of warm, steaming soup and a thick slice of fresh bread sat in front of Rosie. A glass of cold milk tasted sweeter than any candy she had ever had. She ate slowly, making each bite last, her eyes never leaving Julie as she tended to Tommy. Little by little, some color began to return to his cheeks. He even managed a weak smile when Julie tickled his chin. After they were both cleaned and fed, Julie led them upstairs to a cozy room with 2 small beds, each with a handmade quilt. But as Rosie stepped inside, she froze. The room was strange. Everything was covered in thin white sheets, like ghosts. A thick layer of dust coated the windowsill. In one corner, a small collection of wooden toys sat untouched, as if their owner had just gotten up and walked away. On the wall hung a child's drawing of a stick figure family. Beneath it, in shaky, childish letters, was the name, Michael. "Whose room is this?" Rosie whispered, a cold feeling creeping up her spine. Julie's bright smile faded, replaced by a deep, heartbreaking sorrow. She sank onto the edge of one of the beds, her shoulders slumping. "This was our son's room," she said, her voice breaking on his name. "This was Michael's room. He passed away last winter, from a fever." She looked around the dusty, silent room. "It's been waiting for laughter again." Rosie understood. She knew the hollow ache of loss, the empty space someone leaves behind that can never be filled. Without thinking, she reached out and took Julie's hand. Her own hand was small and grimy, but Julie squeezed it back tightly. "I'm sorry," Rosie whispered. In the days that followed, a quiet miracle began to unfold. Tommy, with good food and loving care, started to get his strength back. Soon, his giggles were echoing through the once silent cabin. Julie taught them simple chores. They fed the chickens, gathered warm eggs from the nesting boxes, and swept the front porch. Jake showed them the newest members of the ranch family, a tiny calf with wobbly legs and a box of fluffy yellow chicks that made Tommy squeal with pure joy. A routine settled in, comfortable and safe. At night, Julie would braid Rosie's long, tangled hair, humming the same soft lullabies their own mother used to sing. During the day, Jake would patiently show them how to mend a fence or how to read the animal tracks in the soft earth by the creek. Slowly, cautiously, Rosie started to let her guard down. She started to believe that this was real, that this could be home. One evening, as Julie was tucking them into the dusty beds in Michael's room, Rosie's heart spoke before her mind could stop it. "Mama, Julie," she whispered, the words tumbling out soft and shy. Julie's eyes instantly filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of happiness. She leaned down and kissed Rosie's forehead, her touch as soft as a butterfly's wing. "Sweet dreams, my darling girl," she whispered back, her voice thick with emotion. Later that night, long after she was supposed to be asleep, Rosie crept to the top of the stairs. She could hear Jake and Julie talking quietly in the kitchen below. "They're healing our hearts too, aren't they?" Julie asked, her voice soft. "They sure are," Jake replied, his deep voice full of a feeling Rosie couldn't name. It's like this house has come alive again. But this fragile peace, this newfound happiness, was about to shatter." The very next day, Jake rode back from town, his face a thundercloud. He was holding a crumpled telegram in one hand, and his knuckles were white. When Julie asked him what was wrong, he just shook his head, his jaw tight. "It's nothing," he lied. But Rosie knew he was lying. She had become an expert at reading the faces of grown-ups. That night, She couldn't sleep. She heard a noise from outside and crept to the window. In the pale moonlight, she saw Jake in the barn, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. She couldn't hear all of his words, just a few muttered phrases carried on the wind. But she heard one sentence, clear as a bell. "I won't let anyone take them from us." Her blood ran cold. Take them away? Who? Who would want to take them from this place, from this safety, from the only home they had ever known since the crash? Rosie scrambled back into bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin, her body trembling. A single terrifying thought echoed in the silence of Michael's room. What if this was all about to end? 3 months. In 3 months the world had been remade. The terrified, half-starved children who had stumbled out of the desert were gone, replaced by a girl who knew how to churn butter and a boy whose pockets were always full of chicken feed. Every morning started not with fear, but with golden sunlight streaming through the clean windows of Michael's room, a room that no longer felt haunted by sadness, but filled with new life. The smell of Julie's pancakes and brewing coffee was the smell of safety. It was the smell of home. Tommy wasn't a fragile bundle of bones anymore. He was a sturdy, freckle-faced boy who had shot up 2 inches and whose cheeks were permanently rosy from running around in the crisp country air. The memory of the desert was a distant nightmare, something that had happened to 2 other children a long, long time ago. Rosie had found her purpose here. She loved standing on a wooden stool beside Julie at the stove, carefully flipping pancakes until they were golden brown on both sides. She learned to gather eggs without startling the hens, and took a quiet pride in helping hang the clean laundry on the line, the sun warm on her face, the fresh scent of soap in the air. It felt good to be useful. It felt good to belong. Tommy was Jake's little shadow. His small hand was almost always tucked into Jake's large, calloused one. "Papa Jake, can I help?" was his constant refrain. Jake, with endless patience, taught him how to milk the gentlest cow, how to curry-comb the horses until their coats shone, and how to scatter grain for the chickens so every one of them got their share. Evenings were their special time. After supper, Tommy would climb into Jake's lap by the crackling fire, his head resting against Jake's chest, and fall asleep to the sound of his new father's voice reading stories about brave knights and lost puppies who always found their way home. One evening, while Rosie was helping Julie peel potatoes for supper, she heard them talking in the other room. She knew it was wrong to eavesdrop, but when she heard her own name, she couldn't help but inch closer to the doorway. "We need to make it official, Jake," Julie was saying, her voice full of a quiet certainty. "We need to adopt them, properly. They belong here. With us." Jake's reply was cautious, laced with a worry Rosie didn't understand. What if their family is still out there somewhere looking for them? "Look at them, Jake," Julie insisted. "Look how happy they are. They've healed. This is their family now." Rosie's heart did a little flip in her chest. Adopt them. Keep them forever. The idea was so wonderful, so terrifyingly perfect, that it brought tears to her eyes. She couldn't hold back. She stepped into the room, her voice barely a whisper. Do you really want to keep us forever?" Julie dropped the dish towel she was holding and in 2 steps had Rosie wrapped in a fierce, loving hug. "Forever and always, my darling girl," she whispered into Rosie's hair. "If you'll have us." That night, after their stories, Rosie knelt by Tommy's bed. "Do you want to stay here?" she asked him softly. "With Mama Julie and Papa Jake? For good?" Tommy scrunched up his face, thinking hard. "But what about our real Mama and Papa?" he asked, his voice small. A familiar ache pulsed in Rosie's chest. She missed them every single day. But this new life, this new love, had taught her something important. Family wasn't just about who you were born to. "They would want us to be happy," she said, her voice thick. "They would want us to be safe and loved." Tommy nodded slowly, his expression serious. "I love Papa Jake," he declared. "And Mama Julie makes the best cookies in the whole world." The next morning at breakfast, they asked together. "Can we be your real children now?" Rosie asked, her voice small but steady as a rock. "Can we stay forever?" Julie burst into happy tears, and Jake had to clear his throat 3 times before he could answer. "Nothing," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "would make us happier." A week later, Jake rode into town and came back with a smile on his face and a stack of papers from the lawyer. It wouldn't be simple. There were forms, and visits from stern-faced officials, and a mandatory waiting period. But the lawyer was confident. Since no one had come looking for the children in 3 months, and since the children themselves were so clearly happy and well cared for, it should be a smooth process. The whole town seemed to embrace the new Harrison family. Mrs. Patterson at the general store always had a shiny red apple for Tommy. Mr. Jenkins, the banker, would quiz Rosie on her multiplication tables whenever she came to town with Jake. Even the gruff town sheriff, a man most children were afraid of, would tip his hat and ask Jake how his young'uns were doing. Life was perfect. Utterly, impossibly perfect. They went to the little white church on Sundays, sitting in the same pew Jake's family had sat in for generations. Julie taught Rosie her secret recipe for apple pie. Jake taught Tommy how to ride his very own pony. One warm evening, they had a picnic down by the creek. Tommy chased fireflies, his laughter echoing in the twilight, while Rosie and Julie wove chains of wildflowers. Jake leaned against an old oak tree, watching his family, a look of pure contentment on his face. This was it. This was everything. But then, late one afternoon, as Rosie was out by the clothesline, she saw it. A faint cloud of dust on the horizon, far down the long dirt road that led to the ranch. It was growing bigger. Riders. Coming fast. Jake saw it too. His face went pale, the happy contentment draining away, replaced by a hard, tense look she hadn't seen in months. He quickly herded them all inside. "Stay in the house," he ordered, his voice tight. "Don't come out, no matter what you hear." Rosie pressed her face against the window, her heart starting to pound a frantic, terrified rhythm. 3 men on horseback reined in at their front gate, and she felt it in her bones. Their perfect world was about to be torn apart. The man in the lead was tall and thin, with a face that looked like it had been carved from sour stone. He had cold, flat eyes and a mouth that was a cruel, straight line. He swung off his horse with an angry, jerky movement that made the animal shy away. The 2 men with him were rough-looking, the kind of men who looked for trouble, and they stayed in their saddles, their hands resting casually near the guns on their hips. "I've come for my brother's children," the man announced, his voice loud and carrying, with no warmth in it at all. "I'm Marcus Williamson, and those orphans belong to me." Rosie's blood turned to ice water in her veins. Williamson, her father's name. This was their uncle. A vague, unpleasant memory surfaced. A man with this same sour face, shouting at her papa about money. She grabbed Tommy's hand and yanked him back from the window, her heart hammering. Jake stepped out onto the porch, placing himself between the man and the house. His stance was solid, unmoving. "Those children are happy here," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "They're safe. They're loved." Marcus Williamson let out a short, ugly laugh. "I don't care about your feelings, Cowboy. I'm their closest living relative. I have the legal papers right here." He waved a folded document in the air like a weapon. "They're coming with me. Today." Rosie couldn't stop herself. She burst out of the door, ignoring Julie's cry for her to come back. "This is our home," she yelled, her voice high and shaky. "These are our parents now. We don't want to go with you." Marcus looked down at her, his lip curling in disgust. "Children don't get to choose, girl. Go pack your things. We're leaving in an hour." Tommy, who had followed Rosie out, burst into tears and buried his face in Julie's skirt. "I don't want to go," he wailed. "I want to stay with Mama Julie and Papa Jake." "Blood is thicker than water," Marcus said, his cold eyes flicking from Jake to Julie. "And my blood rights are thicker than the feelings of some barren couple playing house." The insult hit its mark. Julie's face went white, but she stepped forward, her chin held high. "We have cared for them for 3 months. They survived a terrible trauma, and they are finally starting to heal. You can't just rip them away from the only stability they have." "Watch me," Marcus sneered. The sheriff arrived less than an hour later, summoned by a neighbor who had seen the riders and sensed trouble. Sheriff Williams was a good man, and he looked deeply uncomfortable, As he unfolded the papers Marcus handed him, he read them, then read them again, his brow furrowed. "It all appears to be in order, Jake," he said, his voice full of apology. "According to this, he is their legal guardian as next of kin." "But Sheriff, just look at them," Jake pleaded, gesturing to the children hiding behind Julie. "They're terrified of him." Marcus wasn't staying at the ranch. He and his men made camp just outside of town, a menacing presence waiting to claim their prize. That night the happy sounds of the Harrison home were gone, replaced by a heavy, fearful silence. Tommy wouldn't eat. He had nightmares, crying out for Mama Julie in his sleep. Rosie was a tiny, fierce sentinel, refusing to let Tommy out of her sight. "I won't let him take you," she promised him, her little face set in a grim mask. That evening, Rosie's fear drove her to do something reckless. She crept out of the house and snuck through the darkness toward the glow of Marcus's campfire. Hiding in the brush, she listened, and what she heard made her feel sick to her stomach. "Those brats are sitting on a gold mine," Marcus was saying to one of his men. "Their parents' land claims are prime riverfront property. Once I have legal custody, I can sell it all. We'll be rich." "What about the kids?" the other man asked, his voice rough. Marcus shrugged, taking a long drink from a bottle. "Once the papers are signed and the land is sold, they're not my problem. We'll dump them at the first orphanage we pass." Rosie didn't wait to hear more. She scrambled back to the house, her heart pounding with a new kind of terror. It wasn't just about losing her home. It was about what would happen after. She burst into the kitchen where Julie was sitting with Tommy, who had finally cried himself to sleep in her lap. "We have to run away," Rosie whispered desperately, her eyes wide with panic. "Before he can take us." Julie's heart broke all over again. "Oh, Rosie, don't say that. Please don't leave us. We'll find another way." Jake knelt in front of her, taking her small, trembling hands in his. His voice was firm, a promise made of steel. "I promise you both I will not let anyone separate this family. We will fight this. We'll take it to court if we have to." But Marcus was one step ahead. The next morning, he rode up to the ranch, not with his hired thugs, but with the sheriff. He handed Jake another set of official papers. "The hearing is set for tomorrow morning," he announced, a cruel, triumphant smile spreading across his face. "The judge will decide once and for all who these children belong to." As he turned his horse to leave, he called back over his shoulder, his voice full of malice. "You'd better pack their things, Harrison. By this time tomorrow, they'll be sleeping under my roof." That night, the four of them huddled together in the living room, a tiny island of love in a sea of fear. Tommy fell asleep, curled between Jake and Julie, his face still streaked with dried tears. Rosie lay awake in her bed for hours, staring up at the dark ceiling, making a plan. If the judge said they had to go, she would do it. She would grab Tommy in the middle of the night, and they would run. She would keep running until they were safe. She had failed to keep her promise to Mama once before. She would not fail again. Outside, the wind howled around the corners of the house, sounding for all the world like it was crying with them. The courthouse was packed. It felt like the entire town had shut down to be there, the air thick with the smell of dust, old wood, and nervous sweat. Mrs. Patterson from the general store was in the front row, twisting a lace handkerchief in her hands. Mr. Jenkins, the banker, was there, his tie already loosened. Even Doc Murphy, who rarely left his clinic, was leaning against the back wall, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on Marcus Williamson with undisguised contempt. Marcus sat at a table with a slick-looking lawyer from the city, looking perfectly confident. He leaned back in his chair, tapping a rhythm on the table with his manicured fingers, a smug smile playing on his lips. He looked like a man who had already won. Across the aisle, Jake and Julie sat side by side, their hands locked together so tightly their knuckles were white. Their faces were pale and strained, but their eyes never left Rosie and Tommy, who sat between them, small and silent and terrified. The judge was a man named Harrison, no relation. A gray-haired man with a reputation for being strict but fair. He peered over his spectacles at the mountain of paperwork before him, his expression unreadable. Marcus's lawyer went first. His voice was smooth and confident, filling the silent courtroom. Your Honor, the law is unambiguous. My client, Mr. Marcus Williamson, is the children's closest living blood relative. He holds the primary legal claim. While the situation may be emotionally charged, the court's duty is to uphold the law, not to bow to sentiment. Marcus stood briefly. I only want what's best for my dear departed brother's children, he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. They belong with their family. Then it was their turn. Their lawyer, a kind local man named Mr. Thompson, began to call witnesses. First, he called the school teacher, Mrs. Anderson. When Rosie and Tommy first arrived, she said, her voice clear and steady, they were like little ghosts, silent, withdrawn, afraid of their own shadows. Now they are a joy. Rosie is one of my best readers, and she helps the younger children sound out their words. Tommy has made friends with every child in his class. They have blossomed, Your Honor. They have absolutely thrived in the Harrisons' care. Next came Doc Murphy. He adjusted his glasses and spoke in his usual gruff tone, but his words carried weight. I examined those children the day Jake brought them in. They were severely malnourished, dehydrated, and suffering from sun exposure. They were days, maybe hours, from death. I've seen them regularly since. They are now the picture of health. But it's more than that. The fear is gone from their eyes. That kind of healing doesn't come from just food and shelter. It comes from love. Constant, unconditional love. One by one, the townspeople stood up for them. Mrs. Patterson tearfully described watching the children play in her apple orchard, their laughter the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. Mr. Jenkins told a story about Rosie proudly helping him count the pennies from a school fundraiser. Even Sheriff Williams took the stand, testifying that he had seen the children on many occasions, and they were always happy, well-behaved, and clearly adored their new parents. Then came the moment everyone was dreading. Mr. Thompson called Tommy to the stand. He was so small he could barely see over the witness box. His voice was a tiny, trembling whisper. I don't want to leave my real family, he said, looking at Jake and Julie. Papa Jake saved us. Mama Julie makes me feel safe. That man, he pointed a shaky finger at Marcus, he scares me. Then it was Rosie's turn. She walked to the stand, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her heart was beating like a drum, but when she spoke, her voice was surprisingly clear. Your Honor, she said, looking right at the judge. Papa Jake and Mama Julie saved our lives. They gave us a home. They didn't have to love us, but they do. They tuck us in at night and help us with our lessons, and they're teaching us how to be good people. She took a deep, shaky breath, her gaze shifting to Marcus. My Uncle Marcus doesn't want us. He wants our papa's land. I heard him. He told his men that as soon as he sells the land, he's going to dump us in an orphanage. A shocked murmur swept through the courtroom. Marcus leapt to his feet, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. That's a lie. She's a child. She's making it up. But the judge's eyes were sharp as glass. Mr. Williamson, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, is it true that these children are the sole heirs to a valuable piece of property? Marcus's lawyer was whispering frantically in his ear, but it was too late. Everyone in the room had seen the flicker of guilt and fury in his eyes. The truth was out. Julie was the last to take the stand. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice was strong. Your Honor, we lost our son, Michael, last year. Our home, our hearts. They were broken. Rosie and Tommy brought the light back into our lives. They are our children now. Not because of blood, but because we choose them, every single day. We just want to love them and keep them safe. Jake spoke right after, his voice thick with emotion, but steady as a rock. I will protect them with my life, Your Honor, he said, looking not at the judge, but at Rosie and Tommy. They are my children, and I will not let anyone hurt them. The judge called for a 30-minute recess to make his decision. The wait was torture. The Harrisons huddled together, holding on to each other. Tommy, exhausted by the stress, had fallen asleep in Julie's lap. Rosie sat stiffly, staring at the empty judge's bench, whispering the same prayer over and over again. Finally, Judge Harrison returned. The courtroom fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. "I have reached my decision," he announced, his voice booming in the quiet room. He looked down from his high bench, his gaze settling on Rosie and Tommy. "In my years as a judge, I have learned that the law must, above all else, serve the best interests of the child." He paused, and in that second of silence, Rosie's entire world hung in the balance. "Therefore, permanent custody of Rosie and Tommy Williamson is hereby awarded to Mr. and Mrs. Jake Harrison." For a heartbeat, there was stunned silence. Then the courtroom erupted. Cheers and applause and joyful sobs filled the air. Tommy woke up with a start, and seeing everyone smiling, he started clapping too. Rosie burst into tears of pure relief, throwing her arms around Julie's neck and holding on for dear life. "We get to stay!" Tommy yelled, his face splitting into a wide grin. "We're really your children now!" Marcus was on his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is an outrage!" he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the judge. "I will appeal! Their inheritance is mine!" But no one was listening. The townspeople were crowding around the Harrison family, patting Jake on the back, hugging Julie, ruffling the children's hair. Sheriff Williams calmly took Marcus by the arm and escorted him and his fuming lawyer out of the courthouse. 2 weeks later, the little white church was packed again. But this time, it was for a celebration. The same people who had filled the courthouse now filled the pews, their faces beaming as they watched a family being officially born. Rosie wore a new blue dress Julie had made just for the occasion, and Tommy wore his first ever suit. When the pastor formally asked if they wished to take the name Harrison, both children shouted aloud, "Happy yes!" "I now pronounce you, officially and forever, the Harrison family," the pastor declared. Julie was crying again, but these were the purest tears of joy. "Our family is complete," she whispered, pulling both children into a tight hug. Jake stood beside them, his voice thick as he made his own vow. "I promise to be the father you deserve," he said, his eyes shining. "To love you and to protect you for all the days of my life." But Marcus Williamson was not a man who accepted defeat. 3 days after the adoption was finalized, as Rosie was feeding the chickens, she saw it again, the dreaded cloud of dust on the horizon. But this time, there were more riders, and they were coming even faster. She didn't feel the same cold terror as before. This was her home. This was her family. And no one was going to take it from her. "Papa Jake!" she screamed, dropping the feed bucket and sprinting for the house. "Uncle Marcus is back!" Jake came out onto the porch, his rifle in his hand, his face a grim mask of determination. "Julie, get the kids in the cellar and lock it." But Rosie did something no one expected. Instead of running to hide, she ran to the large iron bell Jake had mounted on a post, the one he used to call everyone in from the fields for supper. It was their prearranged alarm signal. She grabbed the rope and began pulling with all her might, sending a frantic, clanging alarm echoing across the valley. And the valley answered. Within minutes, riders were appearing from every direction. Mr. Jenkins came galloping up on his workhorse, a shotgun resting across his saddle. Doc Murphy came bouncing along in his buggy, and even Mrs. Patterson was there, perched on a wagon seat, holding her late husband's old hunting rifle. When Marcus and his half-dozen hired thugs saw the ranch being surrounded by a small army of armed and angry townsfolk, they pulled up short. Their confident swagger vanished. Just then, Sheriff Williams and 2 deputies arrived, drawn by the bell. "Marcus Williamson," the sheriff boomed, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You and your men are under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping." As they were led away in handcuffs, the full extent of Marcus's greed was revealed. He hadn't just been after the children's inheritance. He'd been using forged documents to try and steal land from half the families in the county. With Marcus facing a long time in prison, the children's inheritance was finally safe. 1 year later, the Harrison family was getting ready to grow again. Julie was expecting a baby, a new brother or sister for Rosie and Tommy. They weren't worried. They weren't afraid of being replaced. They knew what family really meant now. Rosie had become a leader in her class at school, always the first to welcome a new student. Tommy was Jake's right-hand man, a strong and capable boy who knew every corner of the ranch. One night at the dinner table, which would soon need a fifth chair, Tommy asked the question that had been quietly sitting in his heart. "Will you love the new baby more than us?" he asked, his voice soft. "Because it's your real baby." Julie reached across the table and took his hand. "You are our real children," she said gently, her eyes full of love. "Love doesn't get divided. It multiplies. It doesn't come from blood, sweetheart. It comes from choosing to care for each other, every single day." Later that night, as Jake tucked them into their beds, he looked at his two children, their faces peaceful in the soft lamplight. He looked around the cozy room that had once been filled with so much sadness and was now overflowing with life. "Love makes a family," he said quietly, more to himself than to them. "Not blood." Far away, the desert stretched out under a blanket of cold, indifferent stars. But inside the little log cabin, 4 hearts, soon to be 5, beat as one. Safe. Home. Forever. If you believe that family is about more than just blood, and that love is the strongest force in the world, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that will touch your heart.